Hello everyone, and welcome to Biopedia. This week we're going to have a slightly different episode, as we're going to dissect a source in the literature and explain its contents, but we're also going to go on a slight tangent and this week explore the impact biology has had in other sectors. Specifically, we're going to examine the paper published in Nature Communications back in 2014, which explained how researchers identified the mortal remains of King Richard III of England. First, a bit of background. Richard III was the son of Richard, Duke of York, who was a central protagonist in the Wars of the Roses. I'm going to skip over a lot of detail here, as this isn't a history podcast, but to summarise, this duke's eldest son would eventually become Edward IV in 1461, and, barring a minor stay in exile, would rule until 1483. His throne then passed to his 12-year-old son Edward V, but the boy's uncle, Richard, seized power, likely murdering Edward and his younger brother. Richard III reigned for only a few years and was killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field, becoming the last Plantagenet king. He had been buried in the Greyfriars Monastery in Leicester, but with the dissolution of the monasteries in 1538, associated with the transition to a Protestant country, the body was lost. In September 2012, a skeleton was unearthed beneath a car park in Leicester at the former site of the monastery, and it was determined it was likely to be Richard III. The first step in identifying Richard was his mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA for short, which is passed through the matriline from a mother to her children. If the skeleton's mitochondrial DNA matched the sequence of people who were known to be female line relatives of the king, it would be a step in the right direction towards identifying the body. Two such relatives were identified, descendants of the king's sister Anne of York. These two people were Michael Ibsen and Wendy Daldig. Their mitochondrial DNA was sequenced and examined, and, of the two sequences, one of them matched the skeletons perfectly, while the other only had a single DNA base of difference. This success, however, stands in stark contrast with the result of Y chromosome tests. You might think that this wouldn't even be possible in the first place, given that I just said Richard III was the last Plantagenet king. However, there are still some male line descendants of people such as Henry II, John Lackland, and Edward III, who descend through the illegitimate progeny of John of Gaunt, who were known as the Beaufort family. In turn, one of their illegitimate lines, the Somerset family, still survive. 5 descendants of this Somerset family were identified, and their Y chromosomes compared with those of Richard. This found that there was not a match, which suggests one or two more false paternity events somewhere in this sprawling family tree. The study then compared the genetically predicted hair and eye colour of the skeleton with the two earliest surviving portraits of the man himself, which date from the 1510s, about one generation after his death at Bosworth. The skeleton was found to be 95.5% likely to have blue eyes, as well as 77.1% probability of blonde hair. The portraits, by contrast, show a man with brown hair and blue eyes. This can, however, be reconciled, as there is a form of hair colour whereby it starts out blonde in youth, thereby satisfying the genotype that researchers obtained, and which turns darker over time, satisfying the hair colour in the portrait. Lastly, the skeleton was also examined and found to have scoliosis, a condition which causes curvature of the spine. Richard III is prominently portrayed with a curved spine, which matches the skeleton. In the end, the researchers were over 99% confident that it was in fact the king, and Richard III was reburied with full honours in Leicester Cathedral, with his casket carried in by the successors to the regiment that fought at Bosworth Field. He was in fact reburied in a casket made by Michael Ibsen, his sister's distant descendant, who was also a furniture maker. Had it not been for the intervention of genetic and forensic methods, we might never have been certain about the skeleton's identity, and a piece of history would thus never quite have been wrapped up. However, thanks to the genetic advances of recent decades, biology can now be a powerful tool in the search to make sense of our own human story. Thank you for listening to Biopedia. This has been a bit of a digression, so feel free to let me know what you thought of it and whether you'd like to see more such tangent episodes in the future. Feel free in the meantime to reach out and get in touch with us at biopediapodcast@gmail.com, whether it's to suggest future episodes, make a comment, or just to say hello. Have a great week, and see you next time.